Hi, everybody. This is the digital experience team here, and we're going to be talking about LaunchDarkly in terms of the buyer experience site. We recently started to add support for that for running A/B testing onto our site. And so we have a group of people who've never worked with the tool before, and we're going to be asking questions and trying to work through the best way that it'll work for us. So first point that I have is I have an MR that I'm working against right now. I've just updated a lot of the documentation, which I've also linked in point 2. I'm trying to be as explicit as possible for running some of these tests. If I go into that, once I find my screen, if you go to that, I talk about like the background for how to run an A/B test. I define what a metric and a feature flag is within the LaunchDarkly interface. And then I also talk about like some of the best practices as listed. I talk about the wrapper component for the JavaScript SDK, a little bit about the interface and some limitations. I don't know, how do folks feel about me just like kind of walking through the interface to start off? Does that sound good? Okay, so if I go to LaunchDarkly, move over here. So I'm logged in already. So as I talk about in the notes right here, a feature flag is used to decide what variation to show users. And so if I click into say like test flag here, we'll see that we're running a percentage rollout for whatever this test flag means. And so that means that 50% of users will be shown this, and then 50% of users will be shown something else. If you go to the experimentation tab, you'll see metrics. And so if I click on manage metrics, you'll see that I have set like different metric names. And so then we can track based on what a user does within the buyer experience site. So say if like a user hovers over something, scrolls into something into the screen, decides to click on a CTA, there's ways for us to track that. And right here, you have the start recording, essentially when you want LaunchDarkly to start looking at what experiment is going to be running through a period of time. In the best practices, I talk about like statistical significance a little bit and how we need to have large enough sample sizes for us to know if things are happening by chance or if things are actually happening because of things that we did. If we go to, so I'm actually going to jump into our old project because we have a lot of existing stuff that we've did. So if we look at this pricing experiment that we ran a year ago in this feature flag, if we go to the experimentation tabs, we'll see like all of this information. And so I just thought this was a nice way of showing something that we ran before. And there's something to note is that you can run various metrics against one feature flag. So that means that you can track like there's an A/B test for click start free, start premium, start ultimate. And so essentially we're running 2 variations and checking multiple things at the same time. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that's like super, but I think that's most of what would happen. Yeah, I think that's like most of what we would see. That's between those two sides, between the experiment tab and the feature flags tab. I find myself spending a lot of the time as I was trying to set this up. So that's kind of a quick rundown of what the UI looks like. Point 3 I have, we are currently only limited to 10 seats in the platform. And so then I talked about how do we want to work around this limitation? Is there a way for us to maybe add more seats? Is that something that we can do? If not, I just said that in the proposal to give access to the DRIs for people using the tool and then give it to engineering management and team leads. And then we will probably need to rotate seats out, and there's room for iteration on this here. And then Laura has a point. Would you like to vocalize or?
Sure. Yeah, maybe there's a way to have a shared like username and password or whatever for the conversion team and the search nav support team. But I don't know if that's like above board.
Yeah. All right. Dennis, would you like to vocalize your point?
Oh yeah. So there's on-page metrics like clicks and page views that we can track directly in LaunchDarkly, it seems. I'm wondering for like things that are more down the funnel, let's say someone submits a form and then it goes through the whole Salesforce pipeline of like becoming qualified by the sales team. How do we measure something that is not on the page, I guess? Can we push the experiment ID into, let's say, if we're trying to capture leads, we do it on the form submission as like a hidden field or in the data layer or something like that?
So I tried to write a comment to this, but I think I answered that part of the question. In terms of pushing things to the data layer, I think that we can add, that would definitely be a good idea. I'm not sure if there's a way for us within Salesforce. I would imagine that there could be. We would have to execute like some code that's like LaunchDarkly code on Salesforce itself, and I don't know if that's possible. That's sort
But
of dependent on their tool, not ours. So that's something that we can look into more if that's something that's of value to us.
but for the sake of the experiment, what we want to track wouldn't that be the click of the button of submit, or the form submission, what happens afterwards? Would that be relevant for the experiment?
Right. Yeah, that was my point too, but there was a long discussion thread about the ROI calculator and we were going back and forth of like what to measure. But I did propose to just do the initial form submission because it's easier and what happens afterwards isn't really on our team. It's more like the sales team trying to qualify that lead. But if we wanted to, let's say like, can we do something like this where so this is the contact form and right now there are two hidden fields. Could we just do another field that's hidden that contains the value of the experiment? And then that way, when someone submits this form, this field is now within Salesforce somehow. I know that that's cross collaboration and then that's probably going to be difficult, but is it possible to do something like that?
But that would actually be more in Marketo. Like you'd have to have the hidden field set up in Marketo, and then you'd have to inject that value. It might honestly be easier if we were going down that path to work with the Marketo team to generate two forms that already has a hidden ID baked into the form themselves. So we're not injecting something into the form that already set, and then we can work with them to figure out, like, get the data as needed. But we could have our own data for who fills out which form, and then that down the funnel we could track that ID based upon that. But that might be a little more work to kind of work with multiple teams to get it all set up.
Yeah. Okay. So it's easier to have two separate forms per experiment than to do a hidden field.
It might be. I mean, it's not the end of the world. Like the form itself would already need to have a hidden field ready to go. So they'd have to update the forms anyway to allow for a hidden field for data to be injected into Marketo, and then we could inject it. But if they're already doing that, it might be easier for them to just create two forms because they're going to have to modify the forms anyway.
Yeah. Okay. I guess, yeah, we can talk about that later about what KPIs we want to measure, but it sounds like, yes, we can measure something down funnel. It's just a lot of work across team. And then, yeah, to my second point, it needs to be, I would like it to integrate to GA as well. That way, when someone asks like, hey, how's this page doing? There might be, an experiment version and the controlled version. So it might be good to have that in GA so we know. And so it seems like, yes, we can push the ID into the data layer. And then, okay. So yeah, I'll hand it off to Megan for her next point.
Yeah, I was wondering, with our current implementation of LaunchDarkly on the next site, can we have ABC tests or like optional ABC tests? Because I know most of the time we'll have A/B testing. I see Javi, you have a point there.
Yeah. So let me, as I was sharing my screen, I don't know if you saw, there is a feature flag that I named ROI calculator. Oh, so let me share my screen again. So that was a little Easter egg. But I did have a feature flag set for ROI calculator here. If I click on that, pretty much what it's doing here is we're setting a percentage rollout based on a number. And so there's a 1, 2, and 3. And so essentially what we would need to do on the Nux side is instead of having a Boolean, we would capture like the number value in this instance, so that like if we're setting 1, like show 1, if you get the value of 2, show 2, if you have the value of 3, show 3. In terms of the way that the slots work in the view component, that's something that we can just add a third like slot in that, and that would be like the dummy solution of just adding a third name slot to solve for that. In the notes for best practices, I do talk about how like the more that you split up tests, the more, the bigger sample size you need, because you're splitting the traffic more ways. And so we should have like a arbitrary hard limit based on like the traffic that we have. Like we shouldn't have like 30 different like variations running at the same time. But I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks.
Justin, I think you have the next point. Or Nathan, do you want to vocalize your sub point?
You just said it. But yeah, I don't know. I find we probably need like hundreds or thousands of users to be able to split 3 ways to get statistical significance. But I think that's an issue with just A/B testing in general. Anyway, we already mentioned it. Justin.
I don't know, Javi and I, and we've already chatted about this a little bit, but I want to make sure we vocalize it to everyone. Like, what are some of the limitations you found using LaunchDarkly in a Nux environment, mostly with like the API calling, loading, page rendering, stuff like that?
Great question. So I wrote this whole paragraph because it's a mouthful, but essentially it's like we have a statically generated site. And so the only way to make a request for something, the only way to like change between 2 different variations of something is for it to happen on the client, meaning that we have to make a request to LaunchDarkly server to get the value of a feature flag. And so that means that whenever someone loads a page, we need to wait for that to happen. And when that's happening, that means that like there's going to be like something that's popping onto the screen. This affects page load times. So say if there's latency between the rest of the page and the contents of the experiment, what's going to happen is, we're going to have to, we have a decision to make essentially. Do we want to slow down the entire page and wait for that request to do, and then show the contents of the entire page? Or do we want like to show a blank area of something as the value of the feature flag is being evaluated? So this introduces like the flash, like a flash of content on the test page. This will negatively affect page speed metrics. So that's just something that we're going to have to work through. There's ways around that, but it adds a lot of complexity to our Nux site. Essentially, we would have to add servers to our front end so that like the server can run that feature flag request instead of having the client do it. And that, yeah, we can talk about the feasibility of that, but that would be ideally. People have talked about like having loading states, adding loading states to things so that like, because we have view components, we could theoretically, add CSS and whatnot as components are loading in for various buttons and things to do, Anyway, lots of I don't know if I like that either, because that's also a lot of complexity added for just this use case of a A/B test. So yeah.
Some of the bigger ones we'll run into, even if let's say we don't, like Mateo's idea with skeletons or some things, like anything, I hate saying this, like above the fold, anything in the hero section is going to be the most dramatically impacted. If we change text or images or button styling, someone will see a flash of something. So it's coming up with like what is the right solution, especially in those first load areas on the page.
I think for headers, we should prevent the page from loading so that it doesn't show up as a blank and then the header pops up. And for smaller things, maybe use the skeletons or just have it pop up if it's below the scroll of the screen.
All right, Lauren, do you want to take the next point?
Yeah, I was wondering if there'd be value to having a LaunchDarkly onboarding issue to ensure a team member's up and running to run a test. But I also made another note, like I see the great first iteration on docs there. What do y'all think?
I look at it and I think it's very good. So, yeah.
I think
Sounds good.
I was just gonna say I think an onboarding issue wouldn't necessarily be bad. I think utilizing LaunchDarkly this quarter, ironing out some of the kinks, so then when we do create the onboarding issue, we have a better understanding of like how we use it, how we want to use it, and then moving forward, we can just kind of work between the docs and an onboarding issue.
Sounds good.
I have the next point. I just wanted to ask Javi, if it's like a vanilla way to do a test in the package JSON file, so to have like 2 lines being control and experiment. So I think that will help us to make A/B testing in the navigation repo.
Yes, great question. So this, I imagine this is having to do with like, and I see you wrote it here, with variations of slippers and the navigation. That's what you're asking. So I don't think that's possible. Something that we could do for the navigation is pass props to it, so that we can, from our end, from the Nux site, have variations then. But then the issue there we have is that because the site is statically generated, we'll run into issues there. I don't have a great answer for you here. I don't know if folks have a good answer. I would imagine that we would need to, again, for us to run experiments like this, I would imagine we need to server-side render something. That would be the easiest way of running stuff like this, in my opinion. But folks, feel free to chime in if we have propositions here.
I think you might be able to. I think you can conditionally import version numbers or conditionally choose version numbers of imports. And I think you can maybe hit the LaunchDarkly API before you do that. But I just don't know how it would work in the build process, because then all the other LaunchDarkly stuff would have to get loaded in first. Yeah, it might be possible somehow, but we have to look into it.
Yeah, from my understanding, this quarter we are not going to conduct any tests there, which it should be just pages in the buyer experience. So yeah, we could think about it.
Yeah,
Thank
I'd
you.
imagine. Oh yeah, I was gonna say, I imagine there's probably a couple different ways to attack that. So it's a matter of what's the easiest for us to execute. So, but that's a great question, and that's something that I was thinking about as well. So thank you for asking that. Nathan?
Yeah, I guess with the latest A/B testing conversations going around, it just seems like a lot of the metrics now we're going to be kind of looking at in-house, either through Google Analytics or Snowplow or wherever else we get the data from. And sometimes it's like conversion that's later down the funnel, so you can't really track that in LaunchDarkly. And so I'm starting to realize that our dependency on kind of the analytics portion of LaunchDarkly are not really there anymore. And so we're only using LaunchDarkly as like a toggle. And so I'm wondering if we could use GitLab's feature flags or Google Optimize, like tools that we're already paying for to save some money annually, if it's just a toggle. I think it's a bigger question, maybe for, I don't know who, but whoever's in charge of the finance. But it's just a question. I don't know. I know, Lauren, do you want to?
Yeah, that came up this morning from Michael, that we should implement feature flags on the buyer experience repo. So we are going to use that feature and it will be there available. I don't know if we'll use it for A/B testing. I think that's also larger discussion.
Yeah, from my understanding, LaunchDarkly is pretty expensive, and I don't know, maybe we're not financially tight. I don't know, but if we can have our in-house solution, I mean, we could do whatever we wanted with it. But again, LaunchDarkly works, so I guess we can use that for now. I was just curious.
I'm going to put another note here. Seems like it might be a benefit to do a spike into investigating how feature flags would work for A/B testing to see what the difference is there.
Yeah, or even Optimize, Google Optimize. Dennis mentioned in one of the subpoints that looks like we do have the free version of it. And so for anyone that doesn't know, Optimize is kind of Google's A/B testing tool. And since we have Google Analytics and we just updated it to the newest version, I mean, maybe we could piggyback on, I don't know if they can chat with each other. I'm not sure how it works.
Do the feature flags allow us to grab the metrics in any way, or would we need a separate solution for that if we use the feature flags?
We'd probably have to track metrics through GA. And so maybe on the feature flag, we attach a certain GA attribute, and then we can compare it to GA attributes over a certain time frame. If we're looking at like button clicks or something like that. Just an idea. I don't know. Dennis probably knows way more.
Yeah, so we have an account with Optimize. You can do A/B testing, multivariant. Redirect is similar. It's like if you have 2 pages. Personalization is probably what we're going to use this one for, if anything, because you can use GA data to show different pages depending on the audience. So yeah, I mean, I know that there's A/B testing and then personalization is something else completely different, but it's free. We have it. We can set something up if needed. It doesn't hurt, I don't think. But yeah, again, to Mateo's point, it's not a feature flag. So if there is a winning result, then we would have to implement that separately. So that's the only qualm this.
Yeah, I think, and I don't know if folks feel this way, but this is how I felt in regarding to the discussion, is that we have something that looks like for the most part works. So let's use that, investigate other things, and see like if there's more benefit to going elsewhere. I'd imagine for this quarter, like it would make sense to just use a thing that already works and see where that leads us. Especially after a quarter of using it, we'll see like we'll have a good sense of what works and what doesn't. And I think that'll give us a better idea of what we want to do moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think we can use Optimize for personalization or redirect if needed, but maybe use LaunchDarkly for A/B testing.
I also have a question. In my previous role, we also looked at Optimizely, but one of the challenges that we had was that Optimizely also, there was a bug in it. I don't know if it was just like our implementation or what we did, but there was like a flash that people would see. And just maybe something to like look out for is like, I think we tried it once where we did an A/B test, but like on one of the variants, people would see a flash before the thing loaded. And so like we just chose not to use Optimizely for that because that kind of ruin the results and ruin the user experience. So just an FYI there.
Yeah, they have this thing called anti-flicker snippet. So it's in the implementation and it will help with that flashing issue.
Yeah, I would imagine.
But-
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say like that. That's kind of what we were talking about earlier too. Is that any sort of like tool, third-party tool out there that we use that has to like ping another server and send back like a feature flag or anything? There's a very good chance we'll run into that sort of flicker or flash. So that's something that no matter what, we'll have to kind of work through to make sure that we minimize like any kind of issues there.
Filza, you have the next point.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I know Javi, I saw in your note in your best practices, we shouldn't have too many variations. I was just curious like what your definition of too many is.
So I took these best practices from, let me check my history, but I essentially just like looked up like best practices like for running A/B tests like on Google, and they talk about how how when you add more variance, you add like more probability that things happen by chance because like the sample size are getting, and they had like actual numbers based on stuff. If you click on, I believe there's a link that I have in the notes. I could be wrong, to track how long you should run an experiment for, based on the variations and all this stuff that you have, and also the amount of increase in metric that you want to have. I think that's like, I don't think there's like a one size fits all. It depends on like how many page views you're getting, how many experiments that you have, how much increase in a metric do you want to see. So I maybe like for this quarter, we can say like, don't run more than 3 and just like leave it at that. I think that's fairly reasonable, given our quarter.
Yeah,
But that's a great question.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the ROI page, we probably can't do ABC because it doesn't get much traction. Whereas like on the homepage, we could probably get away with doing multiple. So I might need to revisit that ROI test.
I mean, a way that you could do it is like A/B and then the winning of that, and then run an A/B test again.
True.
So
It's also worth noting that for every version means building out that thing. Like you're building out 3 versions, and you know it's more work, like quite a bit of overhead. So the less versions, the better for design and engineering. You know, for all of us.
I have the last point. I think it could be interesting to customize the traffic that every the control experiment take. For example, conducting a test on not every user and 20% of the users, and then divide that into control and an experiment. And Nathan said it's possible. I believe that it's quite a robust platform. So yeah.
yeah, I think that's a good point. One of the things that I wanted to do was try to set up an experiment live. I tried running through the things, and then I got blocked by something in the experiment tab, and this has to do with Nathan, like that one thing with like user segments not letting me run experiments. I don't know if you remember that issue we ran into a while back, but I reached out to support if they could unblock me with that, because I think that's something on their end. That's not something that we control.
Have they ever responded or no?
I mean, they responded to me before, and then I got unblocked part of the way, but they didn't fully unblock me, if that makes sense. So that's something that we'll just have to reach out to them for. All right. If nobody has anything else. Oh no, I see Mateo's running away.
I was just thinking if we ever, for some reason, need to test like 4 variations, we could do like a little tournament of components where we test 2 of them and then we test the other 2 and we go. with the winners, but I don't think that we will ever need to do something like that, but just throwing out that idea.
A/B test madness battle royale. All right. If nobody has anything else, I'll stop the recording. All right.